Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Todd Talks. We are now firmly in the grasp of 2021, thankfully. And we are talking about Dungeon Master's tools that you'll find in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I am joined by the esteemed Mr. B. Dave Walters and James Haeck, our lead writer over at D&D Beyond. Say hello, everyone.
James Haeck.
Hello.
Can we at least agree that we escaped the clutches of 2020?
You're right.
Like whether or not we're firmly in the grip of 2021.
Let's say warm embrace. Warm embrace
right.
of 2021.
Okay. We're still in the honeymoon phase. It's still new.
Listen, you know? I'll be grasped, hugged, hooked.
As long as we're not in the vile clutches anymore. Right. Anything is fine.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Upgrade complete.
I'll take any grasping tentacle or eldritch blast, wherever, that will get me into 2021. So
I appreciate we all got the wardrobe note here. You know, we're all like it's a mode, it's a look we have going here. That's a good thing. Yeah. Goatees and black outfits.
Well, I don't think I wear anything else. So we're talking about because we have a lot of new dungeon masters out there. A lot of people are learning D&D and just tabletop in general. And so this is a very good way to start the beginning of 2021 and talking about something that is very fundamental and will make a really huge difference in anyone's game. It's session zero. I cannot outline how important this is. This is not, episode one of your game that you're playing with your players, but you as a dungeon master and you as a player should want to do this because you will learn a lot about your character, a lot about your limits, what you don't like, and you're probably going to learn a lot more after session zero as well. So this all really begins at having this conversation with the dungeon master. How do both of you start this conversation? B. Dave?
Oh, yes. Well, it's on, obviously sometimes I'm on the DM's chair, sometimes I'm on the player chair. At this point, I've been lucky to play enough D&D that I'm comfortable literally in any role. So a lot of times my first conversation with the DM is what does the story require? Like is there anything missing? Party balance in 5th edition is not nearly as restrictive as it was in past editions, where it's like, oh, you've got to have the healer, you've got to have the tank, you've got to have the rogue, not so much anymore. But so I find a lot of that now is more narrative driven, where, for instance, your storyteller might come back to you and say, it would really help me if there was at least one Aasimar. So, so that's going to plug into the narrative in a certain way. Or if there's a Ghostwise halfling that grew up in the region or something like that. That's usually where I start with those conversations and then build out from there. I mean, I always sit. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to jump in on this point you're making about a player who has seen both sides of the table talking to the DM about what's narratively expedient, because that's absolutely the sort of thing that a session zero is great for establishing, because there are lots of players who won't want to do that. And there are a lot of DMs out there who won't want to do that, like people who are really into crafting a story kind of as a chronicle of events rather than as a plot that moves forward. And they might even get frustrated if characters want to serve the narrative rather than kind of letting the narrative wash out later on. There are so many different expectations and assumptions and prejudices and baked in biases that everyone brings to the table on their own, that session zero is a perfect place for everyone to really lay bare all of the things that they think D&D or your RPG of choice is. Because otherwise, some people may end up disappointed when their expectations aren't being met.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that definitely. If nothing else, if absolutely nothing else, making sure everybody's on the same page about what this campaign's supposed to be. I mean, if somebody is expecting eldritch horror in the vein of Ravenloft and somebody else is happy-go-lucky, I'm the pudgy halfling who's going to steal every pie I ever see, that could be a recipe for chaos. So having those expectations is also good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree on that point of it is delightful when a player and to be that player when you ask the DM, like, how can I serve that narrative? Because as you mentioned, like, Aasimar can often get impressions and dreams associated. And anytime you give that kind of opening to a DM of like, okay, I can send, these visions on occasion to kind of move the plot forward. This is a good way to get buy-in from a dungeon master as well, who maybe does tend to be very focused on the chronicle of their writing, and sometimes maybe not necessarily forgets their players along the way, but this is a good way to hook in.
Yeah. Although
a great way to work together.
I will say, though, even though I just said that I do that as a player and I do as a DM, both of you have experienced this where it's like, well, do you have any preference what I play? I'm like, do literally anything. Like, I will adjust to you. Just do whatever you want. I will make it work. So it's funny that I'm like, on the one hand, how can I serve you in your narrative? But on the other hand, now you do what you want, though, and it's going to be all right. So yeah.
I think you and I have gone to the point where we appreciate the chaos. Mm-hmm. Like having to adapt is always a nice surprise. So this all comes down to the character and party creation, and like you said, like D&D is far more forgiving about party balance. Certainly if someone really loves healing and that's their kind of identity, that can happen in a group where like, that's what I want to be doing. That's why I want to be the important person because I'm the core healer. That's another conversation. But like a cleric can go full on attack mode all the time, never heal, and be totally fine in D&D now.
And it wasn't like that for those of you that like I'm like for you don't remember back in my day, certain roles were just vital. If you didn't have them, you just might as well not even go into the dungeon. Yeah, right. So
it was like a hard rain and everyone died in the village.
Yeah. Sorry, Joey. I think, James, you're about to say something and I cut you off there, brother. Sorry.
No. There are just so many things to talk about with Session Zero. I feel like I want to try and give a broad overview of the topic because we've kind of jumped right into a useful and specific aspect of it, but there's such a huge umbrella of things that can be covered in a preliminary session like this.
Yeah.
That like. You can talk about game stuff like this, the mechanical dynamics of who everyone wants to play and what kind of story are we looking for, that sort of thing. But there's a major dynamic of Session Zero, and I think it's usually what people think of when you talk about Session Zero, that involves safety tools when it comes to RPGs as well. And this is especially true when you're playing with a group who you've never ever played with before, but also true when you're just starting a new campaign. Like B-Dave, you brought up horror and Ravenloft, and horror is a great place to talk about safety tools and things like that, because the joy of horror is, getting into a situation that would normally be deathly terrifying and gaining some sort of enjoyment out of it. But one person's fun, cathartic horror is another person's deeply, like, legitimately psychologically triggering event. And if you want to play Strahd to the hilt as the suave sexual abuser that vampires can be, like, you want to make sure that everyone on your table is okay with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a massive thing that you really, really should be doing, and also understand that this kind of comes down to that social contract around the table. This can be a moving target depending on the times that you're living in and what is happening in each person's personal life. As a dungeon master, I probably wouldn't recommend, if someone's going through a terrible breakup, to have them deal with a breakup, say, in the game.
Right.
I just had this experience. It wasn't D&D, but it was Wraith. And Wraith is all about digging into a lot of the most terrible aspects of what makes a person. And one of my players was going through a complex personal situation. And I did pull them aside and was like, hey, so and they were like, no, I want to do it. And then afterwards, after we'd gone through it all, they were like, even I didn't know if I could handle it, but it actually helped me. And I think that's, if I had to describe like Session Zero as a concept from top to bottom, it is just an opportunity to make sure everybody's on the same page, just whatever that is. It's a time to pick character classes, to discuss like the macro plot of the story, the setting, the themes, the pre-existing interpersonal connections between the characters. which also helps. When you sit down and you're like, hey man, do you want to be brothers? Do you want to be that we are betrothed? Do you want to be the bitterest of enemies? Because that actually can be kind of exciting if there's a reason at the beginning why we're forced to cooperate, but Wernstrom, as long as everybody agrees to that, though.
Yeah, that's always deeply fun. I started a campaign off like with two characters who deeply hated each other, and it was just continuously hilarious because it was very much a Han Solo versus Lando kind of situation that they walked in, and before the friendship had congealed, I would say, and it got played into over and over and over again that these two characters were in constant competition, and it was really fun.
I do want to clarify one thing, though, especially with my halfling pie stealer comment earlier. There are that's going to be my next character, y'all. Halfling pie stealer, or I'll just have Freely. It's just going to go on a pie stealing spree. There are room at the table for different character concepts, like especially when you look at iconic stories like Dragonlance, where you have Caramon and Raceland, but you also have Tasselhoff, who is still vital to the narrative, but everyone still needs to make sure you're all rowing in the same direction, though. I guess just to clarify, there's not that everybody has to play silly or everybody has to play grimdark or whatever. Just make sure it all meshes.
In fact, having that character, when you're all trying to figure out the type of game you want to play and having, in that setting, this is what was great about Tasselhoff Burfoot in, say, Dragonlance, was that there are deeply horrifying and dark moments facing Lord Soth. Going to the Tower of High Sorceries, I always pronounce it Shoiken Grove, where there's extreme fear. And even Tasselhoff, who is immune to fear, is like, I don't like this. This is a creepy feeling. That lets you know how bad things have gotten. Where angels fear to tread. They become the canary in the coal mine for a lot of people. So if, say, Freely is like, maybe I shouldn't jump in here. When
he's like, maybe we shouldn't fight this dude, you're like, wait, what? I agree.
When he gets really kind of shy and quiet, he's like, I don't know about this. But yeah, it's a good opportunity, I think, also at the beginning to like talk about like your character backgrounds and your bonds and all that stuff, because those can overlap. Like, if you're a pirate, if you're a charlatan, that can kind of inform where you guys are going as well as a group very quickly. And certainly there's group patrons that you'll find in Tasha's, which is a very easy way to get things started. Like, hey, I have an adventure for you. You all have the same quest giver. But they do have like some. I actually like some of these choices. You could have the characters grow up together and have known each other for years, which is very much the Dragonlance way of starting things. We've got the characters are united to overcome foe. The characters were brought together by a common benefactor is exceptionally common. A funeral brings the characters together. We see this constantly in television and film. A festival brings the characters together, which is much more lighthearted unless you're in Ravenloft. If it's Midsummer.
What are we getting together for? Yeah, right.
Boy.
And these are all options in Tasha's?
These are all party origin options in Tasha's that you can actually roll. The characters find themselves trapped together, which I've been thrust into many times, where we all get arrested. We're all in a dungeon.
You all got to. I'm like,
what
do you mean you've been thrust into? You did that to me. Like, you did that to us. We all got arrested together, and that was the inciting incident.
It was because it was done to me as a player at the beginning of that campaign. You were all mind flayers together.
It's that's how the greatest of friendships begin, being mind flayers together. I don't want to interrupt the list. I do have something to share, but I want to make sure get through the patrons.
Those are the 6 options they provide, which are pretty standard, I feel, options. But there's lots of other ways. I have started games out where everyone's the enemy of each other, which was deeply hilarious for a one-shot live stream. I don't know if that's always going to pan out. You got to trust your players, and your players have to trust each other. But it is pretty funny when everyone's like bounty hunting like one of the characters, and one character is trying to assassinate the patron of another, and one's trying to steal something from that person. And I did set up a Star Wars campaign once that way, and it was so funny It just set the tone for the entire campaign that lasted 3 years. Very Guardians of the Galaxy, I would say.
Well, now I have two things to say. One, and this is just a general aside, that like when you're playing, try not to ever take anything that happens to your character personally. That can be very difficult. It absolutely has happened to me where things happen to my character that I was like full pearl clutch. But I mean, for the most part, the game is the game, and life is life. You're not them. But the other thing that I was just saying when we're talking about these group patrons, a trick I use a lot that I heard somewhere along the way, it was not my idea, but I do not know who to credit properly, is you get your players to give you a list of 3 or 4 things about their character that are true. And then you create 2 or 3 things that are false about them. And you mix it up and you give it to every other player at the table. So they've all heard things about each other. So then some of them will be true and some of them won't be true. And that is some of the most fertile seeds of role playing ever. It works out, especially because if one of the things you say about someone that isn't true is they've got this terrible temper once they're in their cups, and the first time they go to a tavern, this person gets into a fight, then everybody's like, I heard that about you, type thing. Yeah.
I think like that perspective on, say, Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones as the Kingslayer, that he's this horrible man without any kind of honor, and just murdered the king, and the king was totally great and totally fine. The Mad King, obviously great guy. I think that's a good example of like some false advertising, and I think that's pretty a great example. Joey, how do you like to start things? What are some of the ways that you like to start a game?
I wanted to touch on something that E-Dave said just a second ago, his first point about emotional bleed in RPGs, because this is a tough thing for people to talk about. So, which means it's a great thing to talk about at a session 0 when everyone's being totally open, and, all cards on the table. Because some people suffer from RP emotional bleed more than others, and even people who think that like, oh, that will never happen to me, sometimes they just get blindsided, struck in the middle of the forehead by an incredibly emotional moment that they can't let go of, and they'll be it'll be with them for a week, or maybe they'll be running into the next session with it, and they're still pissed off at another player because of something that shouldn't have, huge quote marks, affected them, but it has. And because of that, it's really important to know, I think, that session 0 can happen again at any time. It can happen again and again and again and again. The name session 0 is sometimes a little bit misleading, but it's a good name because every campaign should start with one. But you can have a session 0 in the middle of a campaign. You might want to have like a quarterly session 0 if you're a particularly organized dungeon master who always likes to be on the same page as their players, explicitly. If you're a player and you have suddenly encountered something that you don't that you weren't expecting, you want to talk out with other players, I think it's a perfectly viable option to say to your DM, probably say to your DM and privately, hey, let's have a session 0, just so that we can work out what happened. And it's not always easy.
No.
It can be hard to have these emotionally honest conversations, even for like adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think emotional bleed, that will definitely happen to people at the most unexpected of times, and that's fine. And that also comes down to, when a character dies, like that can be emotional, and very emotional after 3 years. You become long-term friends with these characters, and seeing them go, even if you're okay with it, it's going to make you emotional. And that's okay. Obviously to an extent. Don't don't break yourself on your own character. It's a good conversation to have with the players and the other dungeon masters as well. And that's all part of that social contract of understanding that.
Yeah, that this is a mask you're putting on, but it is not you. But, you know, by the same token, it makes sense that it happens too, because that's how our minds work. Our minds literally don't know the difference
Yeah.
between something that is real and something that is vividly imagined. That's
And
why thinking of a painful memory can make you sad now. Thinking of a happy memory can make you happy now. So when you're completely immersed in these things, realizing that that triggers the same parts of your brain, and sometimes your reptile brain, is normal. But, you know, try and as much separation as possible, and also don't be afraid to exit a scene if you need to, you know, like
yeah,
if you need to back away, walk, go get a drink of water or something, like you can do that, like it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And every character, even the ones most distant from you, have a little bit of you in it. And
Mhm.
maybe especially in characters that are very, very different from you, but have like a nugget of your soul, just this tiny little thing. If something bullseyes that bit of you, you might be like, I did not expect anything from my past to come up with this character of all people. And so you should never feel that shame for letting that sort of emotional bleed happen to you. You just need to be prepared to deal with it in, you know, an emotionally mature and responsible way with your good friends who you're playing D&D with.
Yeah.
uh yeah
Yeah, and again, that will come up. And I've seen it happen to players at exceptionally unexpected times, both for them and for me seeing it happen.
Mhm.
You just don't know, and sometimes you don't know. You're like, and Tasha does talk about this, and this is something everyone's known for a long time: is hard and soft limits. You'll be surprised what will come up in role playing, and that's good and it's healthy. Just, you know, try not to take anything too personally. Obviously, now there are
Yeah.
obviously there is the potential to run into a toxic player around the table,
Mhm.
and then there are a lot of things you can do to deal with that as well. We do have this great, they do mention the social contract in Tasha's, and this is pretty well outlined. It has like 4 big tenets. You will respect the player by running a game that is fun, fair, and tailored for them. You will allow every player to contribute to the ongoing story and give every character a moment to shine. When a player is talking, you are listening. I think this is really great, and this is something like, especially like shows like Critical Role are very, very good about, is they give each other lots of time to do their thing. Like, I mean, when you think about Liam describing his tower, right, for Widowgast, that is like I would say a 40-minute, and I'm not necessarily saying give them 40 minutes. But that is a 40-minute like love note to his own players that he's working with, because he's made a room for each of them, and that was like a lovely moment. So that's a good one. And the second one is players will respect you, and this is talking about the DM. Players will respect you and the effort it takes to create a fun game for everyone. The players will allow you to direct the campaign, arbitrate, decide the rules, settle arguments. But when you are talking, the players are listening. A lot of this is just listen to each other. Very basic social contract stuff. Good things to learn in real life. Also, the third one is players will respect one another, listen to one another, support one another, and do their utmost to preserve the cohesion of the adventuring party. This, I think, is the one thing that can fail sometimes in some groups. And then the final one is you should or a player should you or a player disrespect the other or violate a social contract in some other way, the group may dismiss that person from the table. And this is very unfortunate. It certainly happened in my own games where I had to let a player go. I would say, hopefully not inevitable, but it does happen, especially like the longer you play, you become faced with a very hard decision.
There are interesting pros and cons. Oh, sorry.
Just a very quick thing. I was going to say,
go
usually
right ahead,
before it comes to that, everyone knows. And if you don't say it, the whole group will fall apart. So it's like, there's no point in trying to ignore it. Yeah. That's actually a great segue to what I'm talking about. There are interesting pros and cons to clearly laying out a social contract. The pros, I think, far outweigh the cons, because everyone's on the same page. Everyone's clear. There are no weird sort of edge cases or rules lawyering a social contract. The messiness is all cleaned away.
for the most part. I have noticed, and this is usually the big argument against including these sort of explicit social contracts at the table, and it's that there's a change in atmosphere that happens. Some people will think that some of the fun has been sucked out of the room because now there are very clear guidelines. It's no longer just people palling around being dudes. Now there's kind of an expected mode of behavior. And
I got into sorry.
No, keep going.
You've
got a cool anecdote.
No, please. I interrupted you, please.
I just have one more little thing to say. I think for the most part, it is 1,000% better to suck that little bit of air out of the room and just be clear with everyone. Especially if there are people who you don't know, who aren't your childhood friends who you've known all your life, who you practically have a psychic bond with. And even then, people change over the years, right? Like if you had a friend from high school and now it's however many years later, you meet up with them again, suddenly you're kind of different people. That psychic bond isn't as true as you thought it was. And all of a sudden someone says the wrong thing and there's a big blow up. And then suddenly your D&D game has been the cause of a nasty friend breakup. And it's like, damn, if only we made that social contract, this could have all been solved so much easily. And anyway, go on, B-Dave.
Something like this kind of came up earlier today in a different context. I'm somewhat of the opinion whenever you're like, hey, so everyone should be cool to each other, and somebody's like, well, but that means that I can't blah blah blah. I'm like, no, bro. If that upsets you, you're the person, that is causing the problem, and to your point about how even with friends, I mean, I've seen this many times where people might be trying on different ideas, playing a different type of character. They might be, exploring some things in themselves. I mean, of course, to do Freud proud, sometimes a character is just a character where you're like, I'm playing a gnomish barmaid who's a barbarian and fights with a skillet. Let's go, but sometimes there's more to it than that. And so you still have to respect those choices and respect that that's what the person is bringing to the table, and respect the choices that they're making in those moments. Now, if I could give just a thing that I find will always be useful to you at the table, and this transcends session 0, and Todd, let me know if we're gabbing too much about session 0, but it's hard.
This whole thing is about session 0.
Hey, so I just didn't want to suck all the oxygen out of the room. When you're playing, always try and find a way to set up someone else for a cool moment. Like pass it to someone else, on a character, or be like, I hit him with a trip attack and get out of the way because I know she's about to attack, or I don't know what to do. Hey, quiet person who hasn't talked in 20 minutes. What do you think we should do? Just like find ways to like pass the ball to the other person and kind of give them an easy in, because sometimes other people might be so concerned that they don't want to step on someone else's toes that they don't do anything. So, trying to lead the league in assists, as it were.
That's me as a player. I never want to step on anyone else's toes. So yeah, I love hearing other people say that advice because it means I know I have an easier time playing.
It's also very rewarding when you see that happen, because you don't know what gem is going to come out of like the quietest people will knock it completely out of the park and just kill you with something just amazing.
Yeah.
I had a player who never role played, and for like I'd say about 10 sessions, almost said it and did not, like they did things, but they didn't role play. And then one day just killed the room. Like we just didn't see it coming. Like they finally came out of their shell. Yep. And they were the expert of those single, like almost Corbin Dallas quiet moments.
Yeah. One of my players, KJ, shout out to KJ. Same thing. Like she maybe says 10 words over the course of the evening, but like every one of them is an ace. It's like Gambit, just boom, like explosive. Yeah, and you gotta make room for it to happen.
And that's why playing these games is so fun, because like video games are fun and cathartic in their own way. I reviewed video games for 7 years, but when you're working with other people, and the whole point of this is to be creating a shared narrative, what's fantastic is the unexpected that you will see from your fellow players and how you will react and to those moments. That's what makes it fun, and that's why you remember it so well for years. I remember every campaign I've ever been in like it was yesterday. It is alarming.
Both your fellow players and the dice will surprise and amaze and often betray.
We were in like a heated set of combat, and this wonderful role player, Hope Lavelle, like it became her turn, and she's like, I want to talk to the turtle. like life and death situation, and the most innocent person in the party did the most innocent thing and just kind of reminded us of like almost like the scariness of combat in a way where like kindness suddenly like got in like into the conversation as well in the middle of D&D combat. It was such a lovely moment.
I had a similar experience, and I had to check myself during it. I was playing a one-shot. I won't give too many details because you might be able to determine what the one-shot was, but we were fighting an enemy. One of the other people in the party had already been laid out. So this is, pretty in-depth combat. And one of the other players is like, I have a book of law. I throw the book at him. Because that was the gag. I throw the book at him. And I literally was like, we're all about to die. Like, what's wrong with you? But I had to just be like, wait. It's like, let me just, okay, it's all right. But I mean, even in my own heart, I had a moment there that I had to like put back in my heart box, Yeah.
It's a good reminder. It's okay to be suboptimal and have a suboptimal moment. And I love these moments when I see them in D&D in any game, when someone's like, I would be terrified to not do anything. And part of you is like, get up and fight, but that's a great reaction in your character. But as a player, you're like, that's their moment. Like if their moment is to not engage in combat, that's always fantastic.
That is true.
And shocking and also terrifying for your livelihood as a character. But and again, this brings us to this concept of hard and soft limits that also is outlined. You might have heard this, called veils as well. But this is like, you have a soft limit. And for a soft limit, this is something that you talk to your players about. This is a threshold that one should think twice about crossing. This is something like, it tends to make me kind of uncomfortable. That should be a warning sign to you to maybe not go in that direction, both as players interacting with that player or the dungeon master as well. This is stuff that will probably create genuine anxiety, fear, and discomfort. We all have our triggers. And again, this depends on what your current life situation is. So check in often if you can. And that person's background and history. This is it's a very good idea to like watch it. But a soft limit also is like, that gives you a sense of like, okay, I don't want to get murdered by tentacles and octopus, or deal with spiders, or deal with relationship stuff. This is all very common stuff.
Talking about stuff like this is really, really valuable in cases of things that can happen in the real world, especially. The phobias are one thing, right? Arachnophobia is a classic example of, where does the limit of your arachnophobia fall? Because giant spiders, the Tolkien made giant spiders, they're everywhere. But like if you know that someone, or even if you don't know that someone has had like a friend who was murdered or something, then it's like, D&D is a game where people die a lot, usually by someone else killing them. Where does it fall? Are they okay enough about this real life issue where like you can have murder as like maybe an element of the setting because stuff like that happened in the real world in the past in fantasy worlds, or is it so deeply like psychologically problematic then to like find a game where or find a style of campaign where you don't have to have these sort of person killing events in the game? And if you can't reconcile with that as a player, as a DM, then that's also a valid part of the conversation. Maybe you don't want to play D&D. Maybe you should play a different sort of RPG like I don't know, a fiasco or something like that, where you will still have an awesome time with your friends, but you don't have to confront a world where murder is constantly a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's not weakness either, right? That's not a moral failing on anyone's part. Yeah.
Hey, look, I did 2 seasons on a zombie horror survival show. I hate zombies. I hate zombies. I did it, quite frankly, because it was the biggest break I'd been offered at the time, and I don't regret it. But the entire time, I'm like it's not my jam. It's just not my thing, and it's okay if something is not your thing.
Yeah. Completely. I think that, like, especially dark settings. Like me and B-Dave were in a vampire game, and I forgot how punishing vampire can be. Like, the world of darkness is not called the world of darkness by accident.
Some things, choices were made in that game. Choices were made.
Yeah, my way, because I was like, oh, this is kind of a bummer. I'm like, maybe I'll. And at first, I was playing a very comical character, but I found myself like doubling down on the awfulness and the darkness to cope with the darkness, to make like the rest of that universe easier for me to like absorb.
But that was a valid choice, and contextually it all worked, and it led to some really great storytelling. And even like you were saying with the phobias, like I just again, I won't get specific because you probably could figure out what I'm talking about, but recently a monster I designed debuted on a stream and tripped up 2 of one of the players' phobias, because I'd combined like 2 different elements of, fairly standard horror, and it was like, that's a double nope. That's a double nope.
And when it comes to stuff like this, there is a safety tool, not mentioned in Tasha's, but very useful and known kind of in the broad safety tool RPG sphere, called the X card, made by a guy named John Stavropoulos. That is basically, you want to have some kind of tool on hand, a non-verbal tool, maybe literally an index card with an X thrown on it, that you can casually put on the table, without making a big deal about it. Just saying, like, this situation sucks for me. The situation is the sort of situation where if it continues, I will have to leave the table, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, if we continue to go down this road. So let's bring it to an end.
Yeah, it is the yellow and red X are what we tend to use. And there's 2 things about that. With both the yellow and the red X, they're sacrosanct. Everything stops when they go out. But also, don't deploy the yellow and red X over nothing either.
Yeah. I mean, you should use it for good reason, but don't feel bad about using it either.
Don't feel guilty for having an issue like that. Guilt's terrible. Like, this is a game. This is supposed to be fun, and these are tools to make sure that fun never stops.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and I do, all things being equal, obviously, I'm sure all of us have had our emotional moments at a D&D table, but all things being equal, unless the dungeon master has expressly set out to tell a traumatic story, it probably won't be. It's more adventure. It's more high fantasy. It is more, we're out doing heroing stuff, but I think a lot of times you'll come across things like parents. Like there's a person we all know who I was on a stream with, and we were discussing backstories, and they were like, my dad has got to be a good guy. And I was like, why? And they were like, because my real dad isn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, got it. Understood. No other, explanation required. I had a conversation with Sam DeLive years ago when we did Theogony of Kairos, which is my first stream. And Sam is non-binary, and they wanted their character to be non-binary. And I was like, okay, but do the people in the world address this at all, or is it just normal? And they said to me, something I will never forget and have not forgotten since. They were like, no, everyone accepts it because I expect my fantasy world to be better than this one. Yes. And I was like, transmission received, but those are the conversations you have during session 0, because to me, in my mind, having somebody in the world be like, wait, what, might be a normal reaction till I understood the rationale of like, no, don't at all. No, at all. And I was like, oh, got it. Yeah.
And if you're a DM, this can be a moment that you just kind of like say, okay, and you just kind of like put up a mental ward against it, or then you can take that and start world building with it, right? Like I've got a player who's playing a non-binary character in my game, and they are non-binary in real life also. And it's just like, I have opted, like you did, B-Dave, not to, make a big world building detail about it. The world just did not develop in such a way that there's that kind of bigotry in the world. And it's not addressed anywhere. But you could really dig into the why is it this way? Why did things turn out so well in this world when they did not turn out so well on the planet Earth?
I would say things like that, though. I would put that type of story in the hands of someone that has lived that experience. With Into the Motherlands, we expressly designed Into the Motherlands to be a game that is a world that exists with zero colonialism. So all of the effects of colonialism haven't happened because we, as the people that are telling the story, have been on the other side of that. So we can hearken unto a world where there's not the thing. Now, this is a sticky thing that I just said, so let me clarify here. I am not saying that a cisgendered white male can't tell a story, a compelling LGBTQ story, or a male can't tell a female story, or a female can't tell a man's story. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying if you are trying to make a sweeping social statement, maybe only make it when it's been your experience. That's
And it's
you're
great
gonna
at
fumble the
session
ball.
zero. It's great at session zero to figure out where everyone's comfort level with that lies, because things on the internet, when you're talking to thousands of people at once, are very different when you're talking to a group of 5 of your best friends. Or 5 strangers, if you're playing at a convention, which hopefully will happen again in 2020.
Streaming a game and playing the game around your table at home are 2 totally different animals in many ways.
Being in the same room is valuable. I just want to say one little thing, and I'm sorry, Todd, I know I'm rambling, but I would just say, if you're not quite sure what your group is looking for, and they may not know, so they may not be able to articulate it to you, I'm gonna tell you a couple things you can count on. Everybody wants an opportunity to contribute something where they're important. Everybody wants to be at cause in the narrative, where what they do or don't do matters. And everybody wants a chance where, again, they get to shine. That is the point of these games that we play, where we take on these heroic or villainous roles, but they are roles of consequence and substance, and they're people that matter and have an impact on their world. So let your players have that. If you're ever lost, build off of that.
Those are the best moments I've ever had dungeon mastering, is when especially when you kind of certainly you've moved the storyline in a certain direction, and you've added the villains and all this stuff. But when there is a session that is almost entirely the players talking to each other, and I just sit back and watch the chaos, I am probably at my happiest. I feel like that is like an achievement of its own. Where I almost did nothing.
And can I just share an anecdote for this? This was Todd as storytellers. This is Beyond Heroes. This is back when I was still just a guest. I think this was the 2nd time Freely'd been on, maybe the 3rd time, because when the Illithid invasion was on, and he had the coin of Ceranthus, and there was an evil goddess trapped in the coin, and I literally messaged Todd, if I release this evil goddess, is it gonna mess up the story? And I just got no. And it was like, well, okay, because I'm new here, Dave knew it's an evil goddess, Freely didn't, and she's like, hey, let me out and I'll save your friends, and he's like, okay, that's what I'm here to do, let's go. So but I just remember that moment. I even saw on his face when he was like,
I like chaos.
It worked out. Master. It worked out. We reset time. It worked out. It's
when someone wished, I wish everything hadn't happened. And then we restarted the game. Everyone was back in prison together.
We rebooted the show. Yeah, that did happen. But again, it's times like that. But Also, do notice in that moment, I did check in with him real time. I was like, I'm about to detonate a nuke. Is that all right?
I am famously nuke friendly as a dungeon master because, again, it means I get to bob and weave and try to come up with a storyline. And it's often not a storyline I thought was going to happen. And that's why I love players. Players are just the best. I know not everyone likes chaos, but I do because I trust my players, and this is the whole point. We did stray away from the hard limit, and the hard limit should be very clear. Don't ever go there.
Yeah. Don't even talk about it.
We don't really even need to talk about it. The hard limit is like, don't ever do this thing ever. There's no shades of gray on this. It's just, please don't ever bring this up.
That's where the X card drops instantly if that hard limit has been violated.
Exactly, and that's the X card. That's the I don't like it.
Unambiguous.
There are things I genuinely learned I do not like because of my own personal background, and like I don't like being treated like a street urchin. Not my favorite thing. I take it very personally, and I don't have a way to censor that apparently. Like I don't like being like someone treating me differently because I'm poor. But if you give me a chance to kill a king with poison, I will take it every time.
We call an Eldritch Blast poison now.
Sure.
Right.
Well, these were pre-Eldritch Blast days, so.
Total aside. Shout out to James Haeck because we were talking about like squeaking out players and realizing how far you can go with something. I did my Mind Flayers in season 2 of Dungeons and Dragons of Dark and Wish, and Mind Flayers were the adversaries. And I read your articles, James, about how to play them like eldritch horrors instead of relatively squishy, like tentacle face people. It was delightfully awful. Thank you for that. And we pushed it, man. We pushed it. We pushed it because it was all psychological torment. That's all they were about. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So
and I think the final thing that we should kind of bring up are just general house rules. Like there are things that are going to be unique to that group. Right.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to customize that game to what the players want. This is a big deal in the Dungeon Master's Guide. This is a big deal in Tasha's. Don't forget that, like, hey, they're going to like the certain type of combat. They're going to like certain types of technology to be in there. Maybe a character wants to carry a old-timey pistol. I literally, my characters like carried a pistol and never shot it because I just find it funny that one of them has a pistol. Like they're like, if they want to do something a little bit unique, give it thought as a dungeon master. Like, does it really break your game for this to exist?
The rules are meant to inform to facilitate the story and not the other way around. Yep.
And we've kind of talked about house rules in the terms of like having these kind of like hard limit, soft limit, but house rules may include something like don't check your cell phone at the table while we're playing, don't bake a fish during the game. Who knows? Like
and everyone has their own opinions on these, so you might as well get everyone's expectations straight right out of the gates. And I don't have a ton of house rules actually that I can recall, and that can vary from group to group, but like cell phones at the table, unless you're looking at dndbeyond.com, is kind of a big one because I hate when players are checked out. Like if they're looking down, they may be listening, but they look checked out. Hey, we've got about 10 minutes left on the clock. Do we want to tackle some questions from our audience?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
We have questions. Hello, audience.
I'm going to go dive in real quick. What should you include in a session 0 for someone who has never played the game before and doesn't know what to expect? Give them time to learn. Do not get frustrated with them. Most of your players should already know that. Be patient. I don't know that I would like. That's I think the best way to say is talk around the table and be like, "Hey, I'm a new player. I think everyone should clue into the fact that maybe give them some time. They're learning."
Session 0 doesn't have to be a full session all the time, but if one or more people are new to the game, it might be good to have it be kind of a full 2-hour, 3-hour sessions length, and maybe have them build their characters there with someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
it takes a village
to raise a player.
Yeah, and if it really only takes one or two villagers to ruin one forever, so be cool, especially when people are new, because there was a time you were new. But yeah, if somebody's like completely new, I would work with them even more separately than that. Just run them through a very short scenario of like how they got there that day. You know, like they traveled there through the woods, you know, encountered an injured wolf in a trap, and you know, just let them roll some things and get an idea of that's how it works. I mean, even 5, 10, 15 minutes will make all the difference in the world. And if you don't know how to run a one-on-one session, there are things in Tasha's. Also, I've done one-on-one sessions with both of these beautiful people. You can Google one-on-one shots. They're all on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was one of my favorite. It wasn't really a one-on-one shot.
Was so much fun.
One-on-one shot with my wife and I, and that was so fun.
It's true.
Because we got to be our most awful selves, and kind of fill in a narrative hole as well.
I was like, let's give Avery some backstory. Yeah.
Like he
Sorry,
didn't have
more
enough.
questions. I didn't mean to
Session
ramble.
0 is a good way to get your players away from being musical murder hobos. Why would you want to do that? I would love to see musical murder hobos. No, yeah, sure. That's a
or get them to be musical murder hobos, right? If that's what your campaign is geared towards, or if that's what everyone wants to play, right? If everyone wants to play that way, who are you to say no? We are playing my intrigue campaign. Remember this
group effort. This is a group effort.
Yeah. Well, because it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. Like Jason Carl always says, he's like, my only job is to represent the world of darkness and what it demands. You know, he's like, you guys do what you do. It's going to do what it does.
And you've got choices as a dungeon master when you get to that scenario, right? Because, you know, your fun is worthy too. It's just like you're setting yourself up for failure if you go that hard against the grain. Maybe you decided this group of people, maybe you should just have a board game night with them every week. And find another group to play D&D with. Like, I mean, that's valid. That's valid if you want to do your high.
If you feel as a dungeon master you're not being taken seriously, maybe you shouldn't be the dungeon master of that group.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so, true. That's
just
probably,
don't be a dick about
probably
it,
a good sign.
Or start killing some players. I mean, characters, player characters. We got another question. If one player is forced to miss the session 0 and joins later, what is your recommended way to catch up? Yeah, that's kind of difficult. Just kind of give them an abbreviated recap. I think that's very wise. But have a session 0 with at least them to thoroughly explain what everyone had brought up.
Yeah, it depends on when you mean by late, right? Because if they're like an hour late and they miss the session 0, then it's like, okay, recap them. And ask if there's anything crucial that they need to say. But if it's like 3, 4, 5 weeks late, then just do another session 0. Just get them in from the ground floor.
Yeah. We're a little short on time, so we're going to try to blaze through these. What is this? Sorry, I got a little thing in the way. Would a session 0 be a time for a dungeon master to address concerns and issues he may be having with the gameplay? Like, what if the dungeon master isn't getting anything out of the game? I've actually not ever run into this personally. Maybe you don't want to be a dungeon master. That sounds very harsh, but maybe this isn't the group that you want a dungeon master for, and that's something you should definitely consider as well.
Man, it's really hard to discuss ending a campaign. I don't have good advice for it, not right now.
Or pass the ball.
Yeah,
I ran a very long campaign where I literally okay, I'm burnt out on storytelling right now or dungeon mastering. How about you run a game for a few? And we kind of had a cinematic universe, and this is like when I was 18, and this was very fun. Again, gave me a chance to play, and it almost inevitably always ended up like the moment I got tired of playing, it was my turn to dungeon master, and so that helped prevent burnout of any kind. So, you have something to say, Dave?
It's also I completely agree with you that it's like if they're doing it completely in a way that is like irritating or frustrating, that might not be the group for you. But there are times you can set certain expectations, you know, like in some of the vampire games, there's been times I've had to tell some players very directly, I'm like, this isn't the That's What She Said game. That's not this game. You know, I'm like, we may be those people and tell those kind of jokes, but like not when we're doing this. So you can try and maintain a certain tone as long as that's the tone that the players have shown up and want to engage with.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a question on how much of session 0 should actually be about social rules rather than where are we going. We talked a lot about social rules because I feel like these are the most sensitive topics. The theory is if someone's like, hey, if B-Dave's like, hey, do you want to like play in some Eldritch Horror creepy stuff? I'm like, okay, well, I know that's what we're dealing with. That's a conversation you have with your players. Like, do you want to be a whole bunch of rogues and thieves? I play very chaotic evil characters. I tend to like that the best when it's just me doing it, but maybe you all want to be evil. That's a nice change of pace. But this is a conversation you would have at that session 0. And I feel like this resolves itself very quickly, right? With your group of friends. Like if you're like, do you like steampunk? Do you want to do Eldritch Horror? Do you just want pure high fantasy, low fantasy, post-apocalypse? Yeah. These are very easy questions to answer because we have so many examples in media of what that is.
And again, we're balancing it out here. Like maybe the players don't know, then you can tell them, hey, check this out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking you guys are going to be pirates up and down the Sword Coast, and then adjust from there. And quite frankly, there's been plenty of games that maybe set out with them being pirates of the Sword Coast. And in the second session, the ship runs aground and they go to a town and then don't leave it. Yes. I mean, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Session 0 is a big tent.
And don't be afraid to adjust, halfway through the game or like a few sessions in, because, you will find this, especially like new players or seasoned veterans. You will be like, I don't like this character. Like, I don't like who they've become because they are kind of a living, breathing thing. And they may not want to play that character just in the same way that they're like, okay, we thought we really want to do the pirate thing, but now we really just don't. That's okay to change it up or to move into an entirely different setting. It's still very possible. It's a big multiverse. Oh, I'm frozen.
I can see in here, Todd.
You may have lost me.
We lost to James. Yeah, no, I see Todd.
We lost James, but I can hear James.
We're under attack.
Yeah,
that's how it happens.
That is how it begins.
Well, 1 minute left. We got another one, or are you going to sign us off?
Yeah. So, real quick, what do you do if you don't know there are issues in your group? Well. Check in with your players often. I have definitely been blindsided several times because I'm so focused on being a dungeon master, and you are kind of the CPU of this game. You're overheating with all of the things you're keeping track in your brain. It can be very easy not to know that there is like something wrong in the game. Check in with your players and make sure that they feel safe checking in with you and talking to you about stuff. That's how you solve that. Otherwise, divination.
Yeah, everybody's there to have fun, man. You can always come back to that. It's everybody's there to have fun, and as long as you're operating from the place of trying to facilitate both your enjoyment and the mutual enjoyment of everybody else at the table, you can sort it out.
Yeah, that was our big giant conversation about session 0 for Dungeons and Dragons. You can find that in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Thank you so much, B-Dave. Where can you be found, and what you got going on?
Back here in like 3 hours on Silver and Steel and on all sorts of other stuff. Just follow me on Twitter at @BDaveWalters. It's too much to list, but I will say Thursdays at 5:00. We're in the 3rd and final season of Dungeons and Dragons: A Dark and Wish. The first 2.5 seasons are up on YouTube already. Check that out. And again, I dropped the links to the one-on-one shots in chat. Actually, Lauren did. Thanks, Lauren, because I was cruelly oppressed by Mubot. That was a fun time with these beautiful people and some other people that you probably know.
James,
am I back, everyone?
Sorry.
Sorry, I cut in and out a couple of seconds there. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you. We got you.
Perfect.
Yeah, James Haeck, what you got going on other than being employed by me right now as the lead writer at D&D Beyond?
Oh my gosh, yes, you can see my articles twice a week on dndbeyond.com. I do things like Class 101, which explains currently the new subclasses coming out of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, as well as a couple of just sort of general interest articles. We're going to see an article on Session 0 to follow up this one later on this week. And I think that will really distill a lot of the things we talked about today into a fine nugget of information you can digest in 2,000 words or less.
Right. Be ready for that fine nugget
these days.
Nugget was one of my street names back in college.
That's my gamer tag.
I got a rusted ticket before you get it.
Man, I'm so happy we had you on the show. I love talking with you. It never happens so much.
Yeah, man. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for watching
anytime.
Todd Talks. We are very excited about 2021 and everything that it holds for everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to be kind to each other. Goodbye.